La diferencia entre saber y conocer. The difference between saber and conocer. In this lesson, we're going to go over the difference between the two verbs conocer and saber. Both verbs mean to know. However, each verb is used differently. You can think of saber as translating to what we think of in English as to know. We use it to talk about information, facts, or learned skills. In contrast, you can think of conocer as translating to meet. It is used to express familiarity or acquaintance with a person, place, or thing. Let's practice with an example. If I had the sentence, "Do you know how to read?" would I use saber or conocer? In this example, I would use the verb saber. This is because reading is a skill. How about if I had the sentence, "Do you know Roberto?" In this sentence, I would use the verb conocer. This is because I am acquainted with Roberto. Let's try another example. If I had the sentence, "Do you know how to get to the train station?" would I use the verb saber or conocer? In this sentence, I would use the verb saber. This is because I am asking for information. I am asking for directions. But what if I had the question, "Are you familiar with the train station?" What verb would I use, saber or conocer? In this sentence, I would use the verb conocer. This is because this type of knowing is being familiar with a place, the train station. This is different than the last question that asked for directions, for information, for how to get to the train station. Do you see the difference? Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, conocer and saber both have irregular yo forms when conjugated into the present tense. So let's walk through these conjugations together. Saber is conjugated as follows. Yo sé, tú sabes, él sabe, nosotros sabemos, vosotros sabéis, and ellos saben. Conocer is conjugated as follows. Yo conozco, tú conoces, él conoce, nosotros conocemos, vosotros conocéis, and ellos conocen. As you can see, for both of these verbs, all of the conjugations are regular except for the yo form. Now let's get some practice with these conjugations and verbs in an activity. In this activity, we will be working with the verbs saber and conocer. A sentence in English will flash up on the screen, and you will be asked to translate it. You will need to decide what version of to know the sentence is asking for, and also correctly conjugate the verb. This activity will pull from the whole course, so feel free to go back and review any sections if you need. If the answers are being revealed too quickly, feel free to pause the video to give yourself some more time to think. Otherwise, let's get started. How would you ask the question, "Do you know Samuel?" If you said, "Conoces Samuel," you are correct. In this sentence, this type of knowing has to do with being familiar or acquainted with a person. Therefore, we're going to use the verb conocer. How would you translate the sentence, "Do you know where Roberto is?" If you said, "Sabes dónde está Roberto?" you are correct. In this sentence, we use saber because we're asking for information about Roberto. How would you translate the sentence, "I meet the dog"? If you said, "Conozco el perro," you are correct. In this sentence, we're using the verb conocer in the irregular yo form of conozco. We use conocer in this sentence because we can think of conocer as to meet. How would you translate the sentence, Do they know how to read? If you said, ellos saben leer, you are correct. In this sentence, we use the verb saber because we're asking if they know a skill. How would you translate the sentence, is she acquainted with the border? If you said, ella conoce la frontera, you are correct. In this sentence, we use conocer because we're asking if someone is acquainted with the place. How would you translate the sentence, does she know where the border is? If you said, ella sabe dónde está la frontera, you are correct. This answer was a little bit tricky, especially following the last question. In this sentence, we use the verb saber because we are asking for information about a location. How would you translate the sentence, my dad knows my mom? If you said, mi padre conoce mi madre, you are correct. In this sentence, we use the verb conocer because my father is familiar with my mother. A skill, knowledge, or information, instead we're asking about being acquainted with somebody. How would you translate the sentence, I know the grandma of my mother? If you said, conozco la abuela de mi madre, you are correct. In this sentence, we're talking about being familiar or acquainted with a person. La abuela de mi madre. Also notice that in this sentence, we're using the yo form of conocer, which is irregular. How would you translate the sentence, are you acquainted with the library? If you said, conoces la biblioteca, you are correct. In this sentence, we use conocer because the sentence directly says acquainted with. Good work! You have now completed this activity. Don't get discouraged if you did not get all the answers right. Understanding different contexts can be difficult. For now, keep practicing and learn from your mistakes.